Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and this is the Keto Made Simple podcast. Hi, everyone. Dr. Eric Westman here, and welcome to my channel where I review and debunk nutritional misinformation online, typically. And from time to time, I get to interview people who I think are movers and shakers in the nutrition and keto world. And it's my great pleasure to have back Richard Smith. How are you today?
Dr. Westman, I am absolutely incredible, super excited for our chat today, and it was a pleasure to meet you recently. You came over to the UK and give a fantastic presentation.
At the Public Health Collaboration of the UK meeting in London, in Euston, and you traveled down to London for the meeting. It was awesome.
I did. It was a 5-hour trip for me. So yeah, not as close to London as the UK is a little bit bigger than people give it credit for. Not as big as the States, obviously, but yeah, fantastic event, incredible event.
Yeah, I hope let's get into that a little bit. But first, I would love to have your thoughts and reactions to whatever's on your mind, but also the Public Health Collaboration meeting.
Yeah, it's the PHC. I've attended, I think that was the 3rd or 4th meeting that I've attended. I think there were good arguments on both sides in regards to a number of debates that went on. Yours was fantastic in regards to insulin resistance and what is more problematic in regards to carbohydrate content over seed oil. And yeah, I think you made a solid case there, and I agree. I think one of the arguments that I've heard over the last couple of years is that as a percentage of calories, potentially seed oils are going to cause more damage. But you made it super simplistic, and it was in one sentence when you said to me, well, if you were to remove seed oils but continue to consume carbohydrate, are you going to reverse insulin resistance? And even though I believe that's a contributor, you're not going to, because of the high carbohydrate content. And within that one sentence,
it's the magnitude of the effect, right?
100%.
And that's often lost. But my take home was I was invited, of course, as the kind of history and the talk was the low carb keto is not a fad. It's a fad that never fades. It's just the name has changed over time from from Banting in the UK to Atkins, and then LCHF, and now keto. But then I should mention I was surprised to get a Lifetime Achievement Award from the PHC. That was quite lovely of them to do that. And met Steve Bennett, who has been helping with the PHC for a while, and got to have dinner with him and David Unwin, Dr. Unwin, the night before the meeting. But I'm struck by there's so much more information now that I'm just kind of saying don't worry. The baggage we had in my lifetime is that we had to kind of say all of this stuff is unfounded and it's prejudiced, and there's discrimination against what's really a healthy thing. And so when now the younger researchers are coming out just totally coming at it fresh is just so great. So that to see Dr. Isabella Cooper, who's taking people who are already in ketosis, looking at their metabolic profile, adding carbs back. I think I probably had to pay them to do it. And then seeing the deterioration in the blood markers, and then going back to keto to see them calibrate back to normal is so great to see. And then I think another highlight for me was the talk about the transition of Tom Seyfried's cancer idea into humans. So for ages, his book, Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, is really great theoretical underpinnings, and in the animal models he has. He's not a physician. So it's a huge leap from animal models to humans, and to have I guess it was a 1, 2, 3 punch with Professor Tom Seafried, Dr. Matt Phillips, and Professor Isabella Cooper, all talking about cancer as a mitochondrial disease, and then Dr. Phillips, who is a neurologist working with glioblastoma, showing the study that he's doing, and he didn't give any results yet, but chatting with him, he's not depressed, like his idea didn't work at all. It's not like I guess we would say it's not a home run. He's not curing these glioblastomas, but he's delaying the demise, if you will, which is huge. I mean, they're taking the worst cancer possible and trying to use keto and chemo and radiation. Anyway, so I kind of feel like this whole field is, like a train passing me by, and I want to hold on, and even the new ideas about different types of ketones and giving ketones as a therapy because you can't wait for endogenous ketosis. This was a talk, so I went from public health collaboration to the Keto Live meeting in Switzerland, and the study that's been done needs to be replicated, showing that giving ketones can reduce problems with sepsis, which is very serious, life-threatening disease. So anyway, I just come back full of new ideas, and then it's great. I want to kind of have us focus on the most important elements. So your turn, your reaction.
No, look, fantastic. It's, speaking of ketones, that's what I have in there. I think they're absolutely incredible for a number of reasons. Probably a talk for another day, but it's, the event was absolutely incredible. The whole, as you say, that the ketogenic lifestyle has taken many names over the years, but this is our natural metabolic state. It's the metabolic state that we're born in. It's the metabolic state that we've evolved in almost our entire existence. And in fact, if we were to put man's entire existence into a 365-day calendar, we've been ketogenic for 364. So to say that it's a fad is laughable. And I think,
well, and yes, and if we're all born in an era, and we all, unless you go to university or have a parent who kind of says, hey, wait a minute, there's more to it than just our experience. You're right. But as so many people, and including me, were taught a certain way, we have to unteach it. And I love the way that you're now and other people are coming at it with, this is just normal, or it can be normal. And even then it might be optimal, right? So tell me why. So you're drinking ketones now? Or
yes. So I make them. Yeah. So it's, I'm one of the very few, in fact, one of 2 companies in the UK that's authorized to manufacture and distribute these. But, I'll take it back a step. I'll give you a quick rundown on why I came into doing what I do. I was once clinically obese, type 2 diabetic. I suffered with chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, arthritic pains, daily debilitating migraines would make me blind, for which I was on 3 different medications. I suffered with severe skin conditions. I would struggle to walk a flight of stairs in my mid to late 20s without stopping or being severely out of breath. And, my doctor said that it was a fact of life. And I was just getting older, and here's your medication. Now, I, at the time, was not trained in nutrition, but I didn't want to resign to, what he was telling me. I didn't want to believe that this was just a fact of life. I was in my mid to late 20s. The thought of this being, the end of the road in regards to having to consume copious amounts of medications for the rest of my days just didn't seem to make sense. Now, I had no training at the time, but I knew that bread bloated me. So I just removed bread for no other reason other than the hope of it trying to reduce the bloat in my belly. If I could feel like I wasn't so obese, then maybe I would feel a little bit better, and maybe this would make me feel happier and less depressed. Now, At the time, my anxiety was so severe that I would struggle to leave my house. My life was spent living in boxes. So I lived in my box, my house. The only time that I would leave my box was to jump into my metal box. I would drive my metal box to another big box, my place of work, and I would
Sounds like an American.
You see, but many of us do this. Our lives are quite literally spent living in boxes, and I would just work in this small box inside this bigger box all day and perform this in reverse to go home. I wouldn't go anywhere by myself. I never felt worthy of the company of others. And I always thought that there was something wrong with me. I was on antidepressants and all sorts of medications. And the start of my journey began when I removed the bread, not understanding what was happening, but I removed the bread. My bloat went away. I felt a lot better. And through a series of studying clinical trials, research papers, speaking to people, YouTube videos, I came across this crazy lifestyle, the ketogenic lifestyle. Now, this was back well over a decade ago. So, and I know this has been prevalent in the US for quite some time, but 10 plus years ago in the UK, this was not something that was well known. In fact, I think if you'd stopped 100 people in the high street, you'd be lucky if one had ever even heard of the ketogenic way of living at that time. So this was crazy. So I began my journey. I didn't understand. I began through a dirty keto lifestyle, if you like, trying to restrict carbohydrates, coming back to what you said, in the PhD conference, carbohydrates being the biggest contributor. Super long story short, over the period of 12 months, I'd lost 107 pounds, reversed my diabetes. I was off all my medication. My anxiety and depression was now well under control. It was still there. And I think for people who suffer with these conditions, it's always there. But now I'm able to almost squash these feelings and these things and throw them over my shoulder and forget they're even there. I'm here today speaking with your good self. I travel the world speaking at big events, talking to and presenting to thousands of people. I would never have done that I wouldn't have done it for $1 million because the thought of standing on stage in front of so many people would have been, now and it makes perfect sense because the food that we consume allow us to create our neurotransmitters. So the foods that we consume, the animal proteins, allow us to make our aromatic amino acids, tryptophan, tyrosine, phenylalanine. These go on to create our neurotransmitters, and this balances glutamate and GABA. And all of these things make perfect sense. Now we're removing the anti-nutrients from the grains, the seed oils, and some of the other toxic plants, which are blocking these our body's ability to create these neurotransmitters, because it isn't just enough to consume highly nutrient dense foods with these aromatic amino acids. In order to make the cake or fry the steak, in this case, we need other ingredients, cofactors, things like zinc, iron, magnesium, B3, B6, B9, B12. And we need these cofactors in order to convert these aromatic amino acids into our neurotransmitters. And if we understand 95% of the neurotransmitters are created in the gut, then if we were to damage that pathway, which is a pathway called the shikimate pathway, then we're unable to produce the majority of our neurotransmitters. And if we don't produce our neurotransmitters, things that we're hardwired to chase, like dopamine and serotonin, now we're depressed. Now we pull tryptophan through a pathway called the kynurenine pathway, and this affects glutamate and GABA. It leads to glutamic excitotoxicity, and it leads to a whole host of mental health problems, anxiety, depression, and lots of other things. Everything comes back to what we put into our mouth, and it's super simplistic. I'm not saying this is the key to everything, but I do believe that nutrition is 95+%
of things.
100%.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough I went on to compete as, so I was clinically obese, unable to walk a flight of stairs. And I went on, as the picture in the background shows there, to become a professional bodybuilder, British and European champion. I've retired. Obviously, I'm much smaller. I'm involved in endurance sports, things like running and cycling and high rocks. But these are things that I could never have even imagined doing previously in my mid to late 20s. Now, in my 40s, I genuinely feel healthier and fitter than I've ever felt before. And what I find incredibly frustrating, and you and I spoke about this recently, is there's lots of negativity in regards to the ketogenic way of living in social media recently, and I've been living this way for well over a decade, maybe 12 years into my journey of very to no carb, and I'm the healthiest and fittest that I've ever been. How long do I need to live the lifestyle in order to prove to others that this, for me at least, is the key to optimal health? And everyone I work with seems to reap the same benefits. They seem to improve their mental health, and they reverse their insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and a whole host of other things, because everything comes back to this insulin resistance and inflammation. Once we combat that intestinal permeability and we heal the gut, everything else seems to fall into place. And it's this was what I quite often say to people was I found a secret, and I want to tell the world about my secret. And I think this is why you and I do what we do. It's to spread the word and to help others improve their health and well-being. But it's a tough journey. It's a tough journey.
Well, so thinking back in your experience, did you go out to get special training? Did you take a course or become a certified nutrition, or did you just kind of learn on your own?
Yeah, so I'm a certified nutritionist, and the reason that I did this was that I went down a rabbit hole, and I reversed all of these things that my doctor told me I was going to suffer with for the rest of my life. And when I went back to see him, and it was like, "Hey, doc, look at what I've done. I've reduced carbohydrates. I'm living this ketogenic lifestyle. I've lost all this weight. I've reversed all of these things. I'm off all of my medication." And what I found incredibly frustrating was his response to this, which was, "It's fantastic, but this lifestyle is not good for you. High fat causes high cholesterol. Salt causes high blood pressure. Red meat causes cancer." All of these things. Basically, what he said to me was, you need to go back to eating the way that you were prior to this. And now, I wasn't qualified at the time. I'm not a doctor. But this, from a simplistic perspective, it did not make any sense to me. Eating this way prior made me unwell. I've changed the food that I'm consuming, and I'm living this other lifestyle, which has reversed all of these things. Yet you want me to go back to living the way that I was prior to this? It didn't make sense to me. Now, the doctor told me, and he stressed, incredibly powerfully, that this lifestyle was detrimental and I should come away from it. But this was the best that I'd ever felt, the best I'd ever felt in my life. I went home, and my family and my friends told me the same thing, that what about your cholesterol? It's always, what about your cholesterol? Right. And in that moment, I thought, well, maybe, just maybe, cholesterol is more important than we think it is. So I began to investigate cholesterol and saturated fats and animal proteins compared to bioavailability of plant compounds. And basically, it led me down this rabbit hole. And many years later, over a decade of research, I'm so deep down the rabbit hole that I've come out the other side. But what I found was that this research went against everything that I'd ever been told. So I retrained as a nutritionist. Since then, I've studied molecular biochemistry, epigenetics, clinical blood analysis, the endocrine system, so on and so forth. I love to study. Last year, what I don't even know what year, we're 25. In 2025. In 2024, I recorded over 750 hours of study towards medical qualifications, which is the equivalent of 2 hours each day. I love to study. I love to learn. Now, what I found was that living this way, so A, got me to C. So I knew that living this lifestyle allowed me to thrive, but I wanted to understand the B. I knew that A got me to C, but I wanted to understand the B. And this for me is incredibly exciting, because it opens up this journey and this path of learning and understanding and being able to explain to other people why eating animal proteins is actually very beneficial, why excessive carbohydrates is damaging to the body, why grains are so damaging, and so on and so forth. But it allowed me to understand that why living this way allowed me to achieve all of these things. And what struck me was that what I'd learned off my own research went against what I'd learned when I was studying to become a nutritionist. So what I was taught as a nutritionist is that, plant compounds and seed oils and, are incredibly good for you, and cholesterol is bad, and red meat, causes cancer. And my research has found quite the opposite. And those things I've put into real life. So I know that you like research, and we've spoken about this before, and you'll go to the nth degree to study the research paper and to learn and understand. And I research, I study research papers, but I also look at it from the other perspective. Well, what happens in the real world? Because lots of these research papers can be manipulated. I think 98% of them are quite often funded by companies who have a vested interest. But what happens in the real world? Well, I've lived the lifestyle for over a decade. I'm in my 40s. I'm the healthiest and fittest that I've ever been. I'm medication free. And everyone else that I know that I've worked with and lives this lifestyle has reaped the same rewards. They are thriving living this lifestyle. So it's the proof is in the pudding, or the proof is in the steak in this case,
Well, so I had on my wall for years the biochemistry pathways. You can purchase a wall chart, it's blown up, and then a researcher came in and said, well, most of these pathways are not worked out in humans. So what do you mean? So most of these biochemical pathways are from animal studies, and because you can section them, kill them, and find it. So I was forced with kind of looking at this biochemistry pathway chart, thinking, well, how much is known in humans and how much is still yet to be understood in humans? So even the things that we learn can be reshaped, reformulated. So I wonder, Dr. Cooper in London has this great study of 10 women. That's anti-chauvinistic. You ought to get 10 men, yourself included, and approach Dr. Cooper and do a similar study, or find someone locally. The idea here is that if we had an alien that came to the planet, we would study it, even though it wasn't a randomized trial. And so to see that flipped with Dr. Cooper showing 10 women who had, self-report, I think at least 3.5 years, and then demonstrated they were in ketosis for 6 months. And then she told me she had, thousands and thousands of ketone measurements. And if you want to measure ketones, you do it in the evening, 3 hours after your meal, because she has like thousands of data points to say that that's going to be the best time to check it. So that maybe, so when you say doing research, you mean reading other people's studies, right? So you could become a primary data collector. Of course, it means getting some research funding, or even case studies at this point can be published if there's an interesting twist. But the primary data collection for me was was necessary, because there was no study to look back upon. And even then, when people were looking at, well, the brain needs 120 grams of glucose for the day, it was under the conditions of eating carbohydrates with hundreds of grams. So now we have it's like we're studying and talking about a metabolism of when you're on the moon, this really all has to be reassembled and recalculated if we want to really know that A to C. With the B has to be new data collection, and even other people commenting on how bad it is, in my mind, it's either total ignorance, they just don't know. Like, the doctor probably thinks you still need a cord on the phone. It's like, well, let me tell you about this new kind of phone. Well, no, my phone has a cord. Yeah, it's okay. It's just new. Or there's active, pushback because they don't want you to eat meat. They're pushing plant products and profiting off that, or just, money likes to flow in the way money flows. No one, you don't want to perturb that too much. Well, the world doesn't want to perturb that too much. So, yeah, well, your story and then desire to learn more and more and more, um, is great. And it's relatively rare. I mean, most people will just kind of, fix themselves and get settled on that. So thank you for sharing the word. And I wonder if you might approach a local university. Times change, and as money becomes more available to study, but that was the other thing I learned: the disrupting the total research business has been a part of the keto story, because there are parents who have children who have problems, like Charlie Abrams, whose dad was a movie producer. They created the Charlie Foundation because Charlie had epilepsy, and they've taught for the last 4 decades. And then now Dr. Cooper basically is GoFundMe, self-funding the research. So it's thwarting the no, you can't study that, which is common if you go knock on the door of universities, and you need, money and ethics approval and things. And yet I think what has been demonstrated over and over now is you can study keto conditions and actually see what's happening without study section saying, no, it's unethical. So that's a big change from 20 years ago. When we first started, there was a concern about even putting someone on a low carb, called Atkins at the time, diet, so that, again, the time has passed so that now you don't have to worry about these are all kind of discrimination and prejudice thing against it. I think the science is so solid, and even getting back to the historical, we're born in ketosis, and we've lived in ketosis or very low carb for most of human history. That doesn't count to a review committee who says, well, I've eaten carbs and you need to prove that it's, that it's safe. No, you don't. And there are research pockets that we're seeing, which is great. So anyway, I wonder what your path will be to maybe generate new data, or be happy researching other people. But just beware, a lot of the data that are collected in the kind of critique of what we're doing is from non-human sources. That kind of
100%.
shocked me.
Yeah, 100%. And look, it's more a case of I live my lifestyle and I see the benefits in myself, and I want to understand,
right?
and others that I do. So what I do for a living now, I consult for a couple of days a week. I present to in health conferences all over the world, but most of my time is spent consulting. I've got an online business that I help other people adopt low carb ketogenic lifestyles, and for me, this is a journey through incremental changes towards optimal health. And I see these things occur in everybody that I work with, and I want to understand further. So this is real life. This is real life data. So I go to the research to further understand why I see these things happening. So in myself, I test my bloods regularly. So this is something I'm qualified in, which is clinical blood analysis. And I've noticed how my bloods have changed over the last 10 years. And I've noticed how the production of ketones has changed, and how the levels have changed, and how the longer that I live the lifestyle, the more adapted that I seem to become, and the better that my life seems to be. So lots of these studies are also done on groups of people who are only ketogenic for a number of weeks. Professor Noakes recently released a paper, and I believe it was 3 to 6 weeks that they put these athletes into a ketogenic lifestyle. And even in that, when they compared to a carbohydrate athlete, they found that the carbohydrate athletes only need 10 grams of glucose per hour, not the 180 grams that these sugar companies, are saying. And the reason that we don't see this research come out is that there's no money to be made off people understanding that we require very, very little carbohydrate. And we make that carbohydrate, which is very important. We make this carbohydrate through a process called gluconeogenesis. And coming back to the point that you made, the body contains around 25 trillion red blood cells. The red blood cells do not have mitochondria, and only cells that don't have mitochondria need glucose for fuel. But even the red blood cells can make some of this own glucose. And even if we look at the pathways in the brain, many of these can upregulate and use ketones over time. So whereas we believed that 70% of the brain needed glucose, we've switched that around, and our understanding is 95+% of the brain and the body can be fueled by ketones. And I would argue that the research that I've looked at also, many of these studies have never been carried out on groups of people who are ketogenic for over 12 months, because what we see is that the longer that you live the lifestyle, the more you upregulate the pathways and the enzymes involved with producing, transporting, and utilizing ketones. And these are called the monocarboxylate transporters. So we call them the MCTs, not to be confused with medium chain triglycerides. But these are transporters that we use to transport thyroid hormone, for example. But these are increased. The mitochondria increases. The enzymes within the cells, BDHA, CAT, and SCOT, are also increased. The longer that we live the lifestyle, the more that we are able to create beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is the master ketone, transport it and utilize it. So the longer that I've lived the lifestyle, I've seen my ketone levels change over, the last 10+ years in regards to my wasted ketones, the acetone, which is what we breathe out and pee out. So this is what we see on the breath monitors and the urine strips. We see this being elevated initially, which is a good thing. But then people become worried over time because they see these levels drop. But this is perfectly normal, because now the body is no longer wasting ketones. It's increasing its ability to create beta-hydroxybutyrate. And over time, the monocarboxylate transporters, its ability to transport and utilize the beta-hydroxybutyrate. So then we see the increase in beta-hydroxybutyrate. But as these pathways increase, the BHB in the blood even comes down, because now we're utilizing it at a higher rate. So I find it incredibly interesting to see how my body has changed, over the last decade. And
it wouldn't make sense to spill in the urine a precious fuel. But when you're early on, when you're not adapted, you see ketones in the urine. But if you're, in equilibrium, energy-wise, you would want to hold on to that ketone. Kind of like if you're a carb eater, it's not normal to see glucose in the urine unless it's really high. And so I wonder if there are any, a lot of things. The first thing I wonder is, do you teach, from your experience and with experience with others, do you teach people who are trying to fix a metabolic issue like diabetes, obesity, differently than you teach someone who's trying to become a bodybuilder, optimize their fitness?
So look, I think everything can be taken down and stripped back to some fundamental things. And you and I were speaking about this at the PHC. Over carbohydrate. Now, the carbohydrate, I agree, is the biggest contributor to insulin resistance in the context that we understand it, at least. But the first thing that I teach people, irrespective of whether they're coming to me with diabetes or whether they want to increase athletic performance, and I work with clients from across the board, people with diabetes to cancer to athletic performance. Removing the grains is always the first thing that I do, because grains predominate in the diet. They're very high in carbohydrate, but they also contain a compound called lectins, which cause intestinal permeability. So the lectins, even in gluten-free products, still contain weak germ agglutinin, which bind to the epithelial cells on the enterocytes lining the gut. They cause the release of a molecule called zonulin, which causes a gap to appear in the tight junction between these cells. And this leads to what we know as leaky gut. And fixing and healing that gut is job number one. So removing the grains, we're removing one of the biggest contributing factors to this intestinal permeability. But by default, we're also reducing the amount of carbohydrate. The second thing that I teach them is to look for seed oils in things that they consume. Now, if you venture into the supermarket, there are very, very few aisles in the supermarket that actually contain real food. Now, there are only two. In fact, I mean, there's one aisle that I would argue is real food, but I'll go with two. And that's the meat and fish aisle and the veg aisle. At least, they are real foods, single ingredient foods. And that's what I teach people initially. And I'll always give them the challenge to venture into the supermarket and pick up the items that you would normally pick up and read the ingredients list. If it has more than one ingredient, then we don't consume it. We put it back. But what shocks me is how many of these compounds that we believe to be healthy contain lots of these vegetable oils, these sunflower oil, rapeseed, grapeseed, so on and so forth. And they're incredibly detrimental. So those are the first two things that I teach people. Remove the grains, stop the seed oils. Carbohydrate restriction, once we've done this, comes into week 3 for me. Or the third lever that we pull, because by default we've removed the grains. I've already taught people to predominate animal proteins on their plates, single ingredient foods, and then we start to look at vegetables that are lower in carbohydrates, so typically things that are grown above the ground. And there is a caveat to this also, because compounds that are grown above the ground do contain phytoalexins, plant toxins, but this is a lever that we pull far, far later down the journey, because I think optimal health is achieved via a series of incremental changes. I do believe that an animal-based lifestyle is going to be more beneficial. And what I teach people in the early stages is predominate physically your plate with 3/4 of your plate made from animal proteins and natural fats. And if you are consuming vegetables, then they're the low carbohydrate vegetables, and they make up just 1/4 of the plate. And then as we progress deeper, we learn more about other plant compounds that maybe contain lectins, things like tomatoes and bell peppers and things that maybe nuts and seeds, which are all very, very good for a ketogenic lifestyle, but may be causing problems later down the line. And it's a progression over a series of many, many months. And it's very much an individual approach, because what I find is that some people, I think of it like a train journey. Now we can jump on the train and we can travel from the standard diet town, which is where we all live typically, and it's incredibly processed, high in carbohydrate and seed oils. And we travel on the train down to the next station, and the next place is free of grains, for example. And this town is a little bit cleaner. The sun's a little bit brighter. There's less rubbish on the street, and everybody's generally a little bit happier. And then we can jump on the train and travel a little bit further down the journey where we've removed the seed oils also. And this place is a little bit cleaner still. And now we can jump on the train and travel further down. And the stricter that we become in that sense, the healthier that we will feel. But some people don't want to be living a predominantly strict animal-based lifestyle. They may find that they are thriving on a dirty keto lifestyle, or a low-carb lifestyle, or a standard keto lifestyle, or a strict keto lifestyle. So for me, this is all about consistency. Consistency is key. This is all about the rule and not the exception. So if this person, for example, could live 30 days out of 31 while being low carb, as you rightly say, low carb, but living what we call a dirty keto lifestyle, which is based on macronutrients. The carbs being less than 20 per day, but not overly concerned on where they come from. They are going to be exponentially fitter and healthier than they were prior to that. If that's all they ever do, then they will thrive. But the more levers that they can pull, the further that they can travel on this train journey, the healthier and fitter that they're going to be. And just because they arrive at one station doesn't mean they can't go back, and take a step back. So if they become carnivore, it doesn't mean that they can't go towards becoming ketogenic again. Because again, this is all about, the biggest levers to pull. And as you rightly say, if we keep carbohydrates low, we're going to thrive from that perspective.
I think it's important to see the different angles that people come to this. So having been raised in a carb-filled world personally, and feeling like I had to be defensive to protect even just 50 people on a low carb diet for 6 months within a university and publishing that paper and then another. But now I realize there never was a paper that said it was bad. It was all just prejudging. I'm coming at it from taking away carbs. Now, I mean, with Dr. Cooper's science, and of course, all of the humans doing this, starting with really no carbs and no seed oils and super clean diets, I wonder so Dr. Cooper presented what would happen if someone went on the UK recommended high carb diet, and it was terrible, the results. But now I wonder how much can I, and I have, the language is really terrible. It's like a former addict. How much can I get away with? How much can't I just have a little bit? I mean, so can't I just have a beer at the pub, or once, So I think so. Taking away carbs or adding carbs to see what the detrimental effect is, and not just carbs now, but other elements of the restrictions, the seed oils, things like that. I think we'll be able to tease this out, because the nuance there, even genetically, if you can be studying, genome wide and then gene expression, I think we may be able to match what carb people can have. In my book, I have 3 levels of carbs, which, is basically saying, sure, go ahead and have them. But now I wonder, maybe we should all be in ketosis, seeing some of the science that's coming out. I don't know, from your vantage point of, well, I've been living this way. What do you drink alcohol? Do you recommend, going not clean? Would you deign to eat at McDonald's and even, just ditch the bun? I mean, so I'm wondering what how you synthesize all that you've learned.
Yeah, brilliant question. So look, it's for full disclosure, I'm carnivore. I eat nothing but beef and lamb, eggs, occasionally cheese. But I've arrived at this point through many, many years, through a series of incremental changes. But my metabolic state is still ketosis. I'm still in a ketogenic state. And I think this is where the confusion comes in. We look at keto and carnivore as being 2 separate things, but a carnivore lifestyle is a plant-free ketogenic lifestyle. Now, when I began my journey, I believed that plants were the magic elixir. I believed that they were highly nutrient dense and contained these unicorn compounds that allowed us to thrive. I believe that they consumed antioxidants. And in the early stages, my lifestyle predominated plants. I used to consume my spinach and kale smoothie with turmeric and black pepper, and I was thriving. And if you told me in that moment that what I was doing was not optimal, I would not have believed it, because I felt so good. But what I learned over a series of these incremental changes is that I became more strict in regards to consuming more animal proteins and less plant compounds without realizing, until one day I was in my office and I realized that I hadn't eaten a plant for 6 months, because, and I did this through convenience, because Beef is the
spoiled.
original fast food. It's look, we live in this environment where we believe that fast food is the key to everything because I'm so busy. And this is what everyone says, I'm too busy. It takes 2 minutes to fry a steak. It doesn't take long to fry a steak. It's the original fast food. You can probably cook a piece of beef in less time than it takes to boil an egg. So this is what I was doing in work. I began to remove the vegetables because they were taking too long to cook. At this time, 6 months had gone by, and I began to become concerned because I'm thinking, well, where are all of my vitamins and minerals coming from? All I'd eaten in the last 6 months was beef and eggs. Yet, my mental clarity had improved, my skin had cleared up, my energy was better, my cognition, everything had improved, and I didn't understand why. And this comes back to what, one of the points that we made earlier on. Now I wanted to understand. I knew that removing the plants and eating the meat had got me from A to C. Well, let's understand the B. And this is why I began to research what is actually found in plant compounds versus animal proteins. And it astonished me because plants are not a very good source of nutrients, believe it or not. And we can get into this in detail if you like. But super long story short, animal proteins quite literally contain every single vitamin and mineral that we need, not just to survive, but thrive. And that includes vitamin C. And it includes a couple of other compounds. And I'll give you one example. The first on the list, vitamin A, retinol, does not exist in plants at all. Zero. Because plants contain a plant version of this called beta-carotene, which is not the true form of vitamin A, which is retinol. And in order to convert it into retinol, it's depleted by over 20 times. And one of the interesting things with this, in order to convert beta-carotene into retinol, it costs the body T4. So the body uses T4 to convert the beta-carotene into retinol, basically leaving less T4 for its conversion into T3. So what I'm saying in simple terms there is that excessive amounts of beta-carotene, this from plant compounds and supplementation, can affect thyroid function. So, and lots of other things also. But the crazy thing with this is the T4 that we've now used to convert the beta-carotene into retinol, which has been reduced by over 20 times, the retinol that is left, we now need to convert the T4 into T3. So now we've reduced the T4 to convert the beta-carotene into retinol, but that retinol we've used to make that T4 into T3. So now we're devoid of retinol. So now we're low in thyroid and in retinol. And this is because we've eaten the beta-carotene from a plant, for example. And that's just the first on the list. And we can really get into this if you like. But this, when I started to gravitate down this rabbit hole, I realized that animal proteins, for me, contained everything that I needed to survive. And if we look at every cell in the body is made of protein, every cell in the body is made of fat, as a percentage of weight minus water. So water makes up around 70% of the weight of the cell. If we remove the 70%, the 30% that we're left with, 18% of that total weight, so over half of that weight is protein, and then it drops down to lipid or fat. Only 1 to 2% of that is polysaccharide or sugar. Yet, as a species, recently in modern times, the last 2 to 10,000 years, we've been predominating carbohydrates or glucose in our diet over the two main compounds that build everything within our body. And the reason I say this is that when I started my journey, I was here, and the longer that I've lived my lifestyle, I've naturally gravitated towards more animal proteins, less of the plant compounds. What began as a dirty keto lifestyle led me towards a standard keto, then a strict keto, then what I call more animal-based. And now, I've gravitated into what we've referred to as being carnivore. Now, I've achieved this through a series of incremental changes. Does that mean that I did not consume alcohol or fast food? I'm a sugar addict. I'm a self-confessed sugar addict. I love eating sugar, and we all are. Anyone who has access to and can afford it is addicted to sugar. It's highly addictive. I have fallen off the wagon more times than I care to mention. And many, many people, who gravitate into this journey will experience this. They'll binge because the cravings get too much, and they'll fall off the wagon. They'll beat themselves up, and that's it. It's game over. But it isn't game over, because we get back up, we dust ourselves off, we continue down the journey. We begin with the animal proteins, natural fats, restrict the carbohydrates. And every time we do this over a prolonged period of time, it becomes easier and easier until those cravings go away and we no longer get. So now I no longer drink alcohol. I no longer consume fast food. I'm what we would call as being very strict, but I don't feel like I'm being restrictive, because I love eating animal proteins. I love eating natural fats. Now, the reason I say this is that I don't want to think that people can't achieve the end goal, because it's all about these. You take one step. Let's reduce the carbohydrate. Gravitate down that journey, make the changes that you need to over the time that you need to. If you fall off the wagon, you just pick yourself up, back up, and you dust yourself off, and you continue down your journey. Now, the interesting thing about sugar addiction is that sugar will increase things like dopamine and serotonin. Now, these are neurotransmitters that we are hardwired to chase. This has been imperative for our survival. We're hardwired to chase dopamine and serotonin. Now, we can elicit them naturally, which I'll explain how, but we can also elicit them through a sugar response. Now, if we consume compounds that contain anti-nutrients, things like lectins and phytic acids that block those cofactors that we mentioned earlier, that prevent that production of our neurotransmitters, now our dopamine and serotonin levels come down, so we seek other means to increase them. So we reach for the sugar, because this gives us an artificial bump. But the problem with this is every time we do so, it downregulates the receptors, basically meaning that we need more next time. So we have our sugar bump, and then that rise is short-lived, so we need another, and every time that bump becomes less and less, so we feel like we need more and more. Now, this puts us into this vicious cycle where we need dopamine, serotonin, and now the only way that we can get it is from sugar, so we continue to eat the sugar. But the key to this, super simplistic, we stop consuming the sugar, we remove the anti-nutrients, the things like the lectins, the phytic acids. Now, the aromatic amino acids, tryptophan, tyrosine, phenylalanine, they can now be produced and converted into our neurotransmitters efficiently. Now our neurotransmitters are being released and increased. So now we no longer get the cravings and the requirement for the sugar. Super simplistic, I know. But the thing is, there are things we can do to help with this. We can increase BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And guess how we do this? We do this via amino acids, saturated fats, omega-3s, and ketosis, i.e., we live a ketogenic lifestyle, we consume animal proteins, natural fats, and this allows us to combat that inhibition. Other compounds like CCK, cholecystokinin, achieved via the same sort of mechanisms. The saturated fats, the omega-3s, amino acids. When we consume the animal proteins, we produce the neurotransmitters, and now our cravings for these things. So we need a little bit of self-control, but understanding that if you were craving and you go and binge on a piece of beef or lamb, then you eat the beef and lamb. If you're still hungry, eat some more. And by doing so and restricting the carbohydrates actually increases the natural production of the neurotransmitters, which in itself blocks that craving that, is the reason that we're in this situation in the first place. Super simplistic, I know, but once you understand that mechanism, it's easy to implement,
Yeah, and well, another way to say that is that the lifestyle change that you're doing when you're eating this way is therapeutic. So this is great. These are the B mechanisms for why what we teach works, and without having to add in special oils or my product here and there. Yeah, and that's important to remember. If you're one of my patients and your doctor wants you to be on medication for something, remember that this lifestyle is like a medication. I mean, it's a therapeutic
100%.
change for all these things. I wondered, had you met Anthony Chafee before?
Yes, Anthony and I do lots of work together, yeah. So Anthony and I have recorded maybe 4 or 5 podcasts together, one of which was a rebuttal to Georgi Dinkov's claim that long-term low-carb ketogenic lifestyles increased cortisol. So yeah, Anthony and I do lots together. Yeah.
Had you met him in person?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Many
Good.
times.
So I was very impressed. You know, the history. You know, sitting down with somebody. You know, I usually start with, tell me, where you're from and all that, and it just kind of ticked off. In like in a good way, the not anger, but checked the boxes of, you know, he's legitimate. I mean, he's super smart, and then lived a athletic lifestyle this way. So and I was impressed to hear him speak. You weren't up on the podium speaking, sadly. We got to chat off on the side. But again, the last thing, Steve Finney taught me years ago, and I keep repeating what he says, is we check the blood because it's convenient. You can just draw the blood. Not that it really tells us what we need to know or want to know. So in your experience, there seems to be a growing list of, if you check the blood and it's not the same range as carb eaters, called the normal range on your lab tests, don't freak out if it's a certain, what are the things that you can see that are not in that normal range for unhealthy carb eaters among your clients or people? I think of course, cholesterol at first, not to worry about it. The hemoglobin A1C sometimes doesn't normalize even glucose. What other thing? The ferritin, some people are worried about this. Any other labs come to mind?
Yeah, look, it's interesting that you say this because, people will. So one of the things that I go through with clients is their bloods, should they wish to do so. But what I always bounce back to them is, how do you feel? Because we shouldn't look at a set of bloods, and they shouldn't tell us that we're unwell. If we feel fantastic, then what the bloods say are pretty much irrelevant. If we don't feel well, then the bloods can give us an indication. But the problem, as you rightly say, is if we look at 100 people from a normative range, the normal person is on a very poor lifestyle. They live a very poor diet. They're on high carbohydrate, lots of seed oils, and we're looking at a normative range. Well, do we really want to be in that normative range if the normative range is from a group of unhealthy people? And what I find is that many people live in this lifestyle. Their bloods do change over a period of time, and it tends to move in a cycle. But what we quite often see is a reduction in insulin, which is fantastic. Over time, we can see an increase in HbA1c. But this, in my opinion, is to do with the red blood cells living longer, which we do have evidence for this. We can see this via a reticulocyte test. So we see that the red blood cells are being produced less because they're living longer. Therefore, they'll become more glycated.
Have you seen a study? I couldn't find it there's a technique of looking at the red blood cell survival using radionuclear techniques. That would be better to kind of cinch that theory. I mean, have you seen the reticulocyte count's okay, but I'd really love to see some direct measurement of red cell survival time. Has that been done?
Yeah, I'm unsure, but the test that I would usually recommend is a fructosamide test, which measures the red blood cells over a 3-week period over the 3-month, and this will give us a far better indication. Yeah. But there are lots of things that we see in regards to, we see thyroid stimulating hormone come down because now it's more efficient. But these things make perfect sense because let's look at glucose and insulin response. If we consume less glucose, then insulin becomes lower. It doesn't mean that we're insulin resistant or that the body isn't producing insulin. It just means that we need less insulin to carry out that work. And it's the same thing with thyroid stimulating hormone. It's the same thing with testosterone. So we see.
So that could be interpreted as low thyroid or low testosterone.
Yeah. When in fact, so let's look at testosterone, for example. Testosterone, male sex hormone, but it's also used in many other things. So it's used in the production of red blood cells. So if the red blood cells are living longer, i.e. we're making less of them, then maybe our requirement for testosterone becomes less. It's also used in glycolysis. Well, now we're no longer using glucose for fuel, so now our requirement for testosterone becomes even lower. And it's also used in lipolysis, i.e. the breakdown of stored body fat for the use of beta oxidation. Now, this is why I believe that we see an increase in testosterone. Many people report an increase in testosterone when they become ketogenic and carnivore in the early stages. And I believe that it's because of this process of lipolysis increasing this. But what we see, there are many influencers that claim that their testosterone is tanked after a couple of years of being ketogenic and carnivore. But in my opinion, it's because now the body fat is percentage a lot less. Now we're using less of this for energy, and we're using more of the dietary fat for energy. So there are at least 3 mechanisms there from a simplistic point of view in regards to why testosterone will become less. Now, if we look at, so my testosterone has done exactly this. It's increased and it's come down, and it's technically within a normative range, but very, very low in that normative range. Now, I gravitated towards endurance sports over the last few years, and I've recently gone back into resistance training. I've had a few weeks back. I'm building muscle hand over fist. It's coming back like I've never seen before. I'm not big currently. I'll never get back to this because that's not where I want to be. But my body's healing and repairing at a rate of knots. Now, this shouldn't be happening in my 40s. You know, this is something that you see it in your 20s. And I already know that I'm going to be fitter and stronger than I ever was prior with the rate of improvement. My energy's through the roof. I've got no issues with libido. So everything that we would see as a result of what we deem to be lower end testosterone, it just does not play out in the real world. And this is where I think that the confusion comes in regards to, let's look at the bloods, or you have this. And there's a danger to this, because if we look at your bloods are out of a range, we need cholesterol being the perfect example. Well, let's remove the saturated fats. Well, wait a minute. You know, glucose increases cholesterol also. So if we look at beta oxidation or glycolysis, both create acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA will enter a pathway called HMG-CoA. HMG-CoA goes on to create cholesterol. It's not just fat that makes cholesterol. We make cholesterol from sugar, from glucose also. You know, so it just doesn't, the whole premise behind reducing the fat just does not make sense. And cholesterol is essential for the production of testosterone and estrogen.
Let's get into this on another time, because a whole nother set of science that has come out that I'd love to talk to you about is the lean mass hyperresponder study. And because it was kind of an aha moment for me, I went to the meeting called Keto Live in Switzerland and sat in a lecture on glycation. And glycation of hemoglobin is just a minor thing. It's glycation of the proteins in the cells. And so to me, that was an aha moment, because I'm worried about the throughput of the carbohydrate, not just the hemoglobin A1C or the glucose level. I want to know what's going on inside. Again, we measure the blood because it's convenient. But so it was an hour-long lecture really on all of the damage that happens with the glycation of the intracellular proteins, which really helps me in the kind of thing that I've been seeing is that the number, the glucose and the A1C, if you're not eating as many carbs, this isn't the whole picture. Actually, it's just a fraction of the glycation that's going on inside the cell. So
100%.
You know, the red blood cell lifestyle or lifespan is one thing, but also the idea that you're just not glycating intracellular proteins like you're used to. I think that's where the benefit is in terms of diabetes reversal and not getting diabetes. Anyway, that was the juxtaposition of these two meetings was just great to be able to see things. Again, what different angles coming at it, from lowering carb, raising carb, adding other kinds of things. And I'm still holding out that I want to know if adding something to what we already do, is there incremental benefit of something? So that's the, we said in lectures on light and circadian rhythm and all these things. And I'm like, well, again, what's the most powerful thing that we do? And I think
100%.
we're still lowering the carbs, getting adequate protein, running on fat for fuel. That's the main thing, right?
100%. It's look, we look at all of these medications and plant compounds and magic elixirs for increase in antioxidant benefit. Ketones increase glutathione. We do this naturally without having to consume any medication. The body makes glutathione. When we produce ketones, it increases nitric oxide. It helps block NLRP3 inflammasome. It increases mechanical efficiency of the heart, blood flow, brain function. Ketones is the body's natural way of healing and repairing. And it's super simplistic, but there's no money to be made off telling people to live a ketogenic lifestyle.
But so now I'd like to see in the, like Dr. Cooper's model, I'd like to see what if people do strict keto and measuring everything, but then they add in some things, low carb, what's the incremental benefit? We could do a randomized trial, or in the N of 1 idea, the crossover study that she did. But I don't know. I still don't know if you need to be in ketosis. If it might come out one day, you do that study and you get an extra 10 days of life, kind of like these drug studies that, it's just not worth having to go through all of that. But we should wrap up. And I just, again, thank you for your using your experience and then teaching others and learning as much as you can. And I just, to my patients, I think we need to listen to people who come to this with a fresh set of eyes, and also who don't have that baggage that we had or have. Still, there's kind of a nagging, question. Are you sure you can eat all that fat, for a, and no, yeah, well, you can. So how do people find you, and would you agree to talk again sometime?
100%. Look, this has been incredible, and I think there are so many topics that we can get into. And look, thanks again, Dr. Westman, for the invitation. Happy to chat anytime. But you can find me the easiest way is on YouTube through Richard Smith Nutrition, and all of my links to other socials are pasted in every video. But look, one of the things that I just like to leave you guys with, circling back to what you just mentioned, I'm in pursuit of optimal health. I'm not wedded to this word keto. I'm not wedded to the word carnivore. In fact, when I teach people, I don't teach keto, I don't teach low carb, I don't teach carnivore. I teach optimal health. If adding in carbohydrates at any point is going to confer a benefit, then I'm all for it. But in my experience, when I've done it on myself and when I've trialed this with other clients over many, many years, the introduction or at least overconsumption of carbohydrates for me always leads to detrimental effects. It's I thrive on zero carb. And if, as a sugar addict, if putting carbohydrate back in was to confer a benefit, I would be doing this. But we're all on our own journey, and it's just interesting to see how different people respond to this. But, we are certainly not wedded. We're in pursuit of optimal health, the truth.
Great to meet you. And you had your own following outside the meeting. I noticed people coming to see you in London. So that was, it's always fun. You're no longer the introvert.
Still an introvert at heart.
Well, it's always fun to have people thank you for your work. And again, thank you, Richard. And let's talk again.
Fantastic. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our YouTube membership for early access and exclusive live Q&As with me. Just click the join button below or support us with a PayPal in the description.